laughter and polite applause. My son David stood at the center of it, all tall, confident, his arm proudly wrapped around his beautiful wife Sophie. I stood at the edge of the room, clutching my small purse, my heart swelling with pride. It was his company's annual dinner, a grand affair celebrating yet another successful year for Henderson Design Solutions. Everywhere I looked, people were congratulating David. I couldn't help but think of the nights we'd spent years ago at the kitchen table, sketching designs by hand under a dim bulb, while the rain leaked through the old roof. I smiled at the memory. We had come so far. "Mom, glad you made it," David said quickly, brushing a kiss on my cheek before disappearing back into the crowd. He didn't notice that I had spent 3 days picking this navy dress, the one that made me feel just a little like my younger self. Sophie glided toward me, her gown glittering under the chandelier. She looked perfect, and she knew it. "Oh, Margaret," she said sweetly, her voice dripping honey that burned my ears. "You look adorable tonight. It's so brave of you to come." The insult that broke her heart. "No, these business events can be overwhelming for you." I smiled gently. "I'm proud of David. You both have done well." She tilted her head, that familiar smirk tugging at her lips. "Yes, we really have. Haven't we?" Her words stung more than I cared to admit. We, as if she had built the company from her manicured hands. A few minutes later, one of the investors, a gray-haired man with a jovial smile, approached and asked, "And you, ma'am, what do you do at the company?" Before I could answer, Sophie laughed lightly and placed her hand on his arm. "Oh, her. She's just David's mom. She doesn't really do anything related to the business. She's, well, nobody important, but she loves attending family events." The table erupted in polite laughter, and in that moment, something inside me cracked. Nobody important. The words wrapped around my heart like barbed wire. I looked at David, waiting, hoping, praying he'd say something, anything. But he only smiled weakly and raised his glass, pretending not to notice the humiliation etched across my face. I excused myself quietly and walked out onto the balcony. The cold air hit my cheeks, and for the first time in years, I felt small again, like the widow who had once begged the bank for a loan to keep her husband's dream alive. I gripped the railing, blinking back tears. They saw an old woman, a guest, a relic, but they didn't know. They didn't know that the company they praised, the one with the golden logo on the wall, had been born from my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. They had no idea who I really was. I stood there, flashback. The woman who built everything under the city lights, the laughter echoing faintly from inside. Then slowly a calmness spread through me. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from realization. They thought I was nobody, but soon I would remind them that without that nobody, none of this would exist. The woman they dismissed would be the one to humble them all. That night, sleep refused to come. The sound of laughter from the dinner echoed in my head, Sophie's mocking tone, the awkward silence that followed, and David's hollow smile. Every word replayed until the anger in my chest began to burn into resolve. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and walked to my old study, a room David and Sophie probably thought was nothing more than a storage closet. Dust floated in the light as I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. There, wrapped carefully in a faded brown envelope, were the papers that held my life's work. Henderson Design Solutions Founding Ownership Agreement. My name, Margaret Henderson, was written in bold black ink, 60% shareholder. My fingers trembled as I traced the signature. Memories flooded back like an old film reel. Blurry, bittersweet, and heavy. I saw myself again, a 28-year-old widow with a 3-year-old son and a heart full of fear. My husband, Robert, had died suddenly in a car accident, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and the shell of a dream, a tiny design studio we'd started together. Everyone told me to sell it, to move on, to find a real job, but I couldn't. That studio was the last piece of him. So, I worked days, nights, and weekends. I taught myself accounting, design software, and contracts, things I'd never imagined I'd need to know. When the bank refused to give me a loan, I sold my jewelry. When the roof leaked, I fixed it myself. I remembered David coloring in the corner, while I designed logos for clients who barely paid me enough for groceries. And yet, every time a client smiled, every time I saw my work hanging on a storefront window, it reminded me why I kept going. When David turned 18, I handed him a share of the company, 40%. He was talented and ambitious, and I wanted him to carry the dream forward. I thought I was giving him a gift. I didn't realize I was also giving away the part of myself I'd spent decades protecting. I stayed in the background because I believed mothers should support, not overshadow. I let him take credit. I let Sophie become the face of the family's success. I told myself it was love, that it didn't matter who got the applause as long as David was happy. But that night at the dinner, I finally understood something cruel. Silence can be mistaken for insignificance. They had rewritten history, made me a footnote in a story I had written from scratch. I sat there staring at the paper, tears falling onto the faded ink. I wasn't angry just because Sophie had called me a nobody. I was angry because years of silence and sacrifice I had allowed her to believe it. I had let my voice fade for too long. The next morning, I called the company lawyer, an old friend who had been with me since the beginning. "Charles," I said, my voice steady, "I think it's time I attended a board meeting." He chuckled softly. "It's been years. Margaret, you sure you're ready?" I smiled faintly. "I've been ready for 25 years. They just forgot who I am." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker, like 1,000 tiny reminders of my journey. I thought of Robert, of the promises we made, of the empire we built from nothing. And I whispered softly, "They'll remember us soon, my love. I promise you that." The woman they dismissed as nobody was about to remind them that behind every successful man and his elegant wife, there is often a mother who built the ground they stand on. The boardroom was cold that morning, sleek marble floors, tall glass walls, and an air of arrogance that seemed to hum beneath the fluorescent lights. The meeting was scheduled to finalize the company's merger with Wexler Group, a deal Sophie had been bragging about for weeks. I wasn't supposed to be there. At least that's what everyone thought. As I entered, the room fell silent. Every executive paused mid-sentence, and Sophie's perfectly painted smile faltered for just a moment. "Margaret?" she said tightly, standing from her the decision to fight back seat. "What are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting." I smiled, calm and steady. "I'm aware that's why I'm here." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, maybe we can talk later. This is kind of a family matter," I interrupted softly. "Yes, I suppose it is." I placed a thick folder on the polished table. My lawyer, Charles, stepped in behind me and set down a stack of documents. For the executives exchanged curious glances, whispering among themselves. Sophie folded her arms. "I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of a very important deal. You can't just walk in." And I opened the folder and slid a document across the table toward the lead investor. "Before you sign anything," I said, "you should know who you're actually negotiating with." He frowned, reading the top of the page, then his eyebrows lifted in surprise. 60% ownership under the name Margaret Henderson. The silence that followed was thick enough to stop time. David blinked, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, what is this?" I met his eyes. "It's the truth, David. I never gave up my shares. I started this company with your father. I built it from the ground up. You run it, but I own it." Sophie's face drained of color. "That can't be right," she stammered. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," I said, my tone the boardroom showdown quiet but firm. "You and David have done well. But somewhere along the way, you forgot where it all began. Who held this company together when it was just an idea scribbled on a napkin?" I turned to the lead investor. "In this merger you're all about to sign, it's with a company under investigation for fraud and money laundering. I won't allow Henderson Design Solutions to be dragged through the mud for greed." Gasps filled the room. The investor immediately looked at Sophie. "Is this true?" Her lips trembled. "I didn't know." I clasped my hands in front of me. "That's because you never ask. You were too busy trying to look powerful to understand what power really means." Then I said it, the words that had been waiting on my tongue since that humiliating dinner. "So the next time you call someone a nobody, make sure she isn't the one signing your paychecks." The air seemed to shatter. Sophie looked down, unable to meet my eyes. David's face was red with a mix of shock and shame. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and stood tall. "This meeting is adjourned. The merger is off, and from now on all financial decisions go through me." No one spoke, no one dared. As I turned to leave, my heels clicked against the marble floor, steady, measured, powerful. For years I'd walked quietly behind my son and his ambitious wife. But that day, every step I took reminded them that I was the foundation beneath their success. For the first time in a long time, I felt my husband beside me again, proud, steady, and smiling in my heart. I wasn't nobody. I was the woman who built everything. The days following that board meeting felt strangely quiet. The whispers that once fluttered around the office about the boss's mother had turned into respectful nods and cautious greetings. For the first time in years, people looked me in the eye. But the person I most wanted to hear from hadn't called until one evening. As the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, I heard a knock at my door. It was David. He looked tired, his usual confidence replaced by something softer. Guilt, perhaps. He held a small bouquet of lilies, my favorite. "Mom," he said quietly. "I don't even know where to start." I gestured for him to come in. "Start with the truth," I said. He sat down at the kitchen table. The same one the truth revealed who really owns it all, where he'd done his homework as a boy. "I should have stopped her," he whispered. "When Sophie said those things at the dinner, I just froze. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I just thought you wanted to stay in the background." I smiled sadly. "I did for a long time because I wanted you to shine, David. I wanted to give you everything your father dreamed for you. But there's a difference between stepping back and being erased." He lowered his head, tears gathering in his eyes. "You built everything, and I acted like it was all me, for I reached across the table and took his hand. You're still my son, David. You made mistakes, yes, but so did I. I stayed silent too long. Maybe we both needed a reminder." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw the boy I once raised, humble, grateful human. A week later, Sophie came by. No designer clothes this time. No diamond necklace. Just a simple blouse and trembling hands. "Margaret," she began, her voice cracking. "I was wrong. I thought success was about how people saw us, the cars, the events, the image. But you showed me it's about what we build, not what we flaunt." I watched her for a moment. The arrogance that once clung to her was gone, replaced by genuine remorse. "I don't hate you, Sophie," I said gently. "But I hope this taught you something that no business school ever could. Respect is earned, not worn." She nodded, tears falling freely. "If you'll allow it, I want to make it right. I'd like to run the company's new charity division, help women like you once were, starting from nothing." That made me smile. That's a good start. Months passed. The company grew stronger, more honest, more apologies, lessons, and healing compassionate. Sophie's projects helped struggling single mothers start their own small businesses. David learned to lead with humility, not ego. And as for me, I finally found peace in knowing my story had been reclaimed. One afternoon, as I walked through the company lobby, I stopped to look at the new plaque on the wall, for Henderson Design Solutions, founded by Margaret and Robert Henderson, 1986. I felt tears prick my eyes. For decades I had been invisible in my own story, but now my name stood where it always belonged, not in the shadows, but in the foundation. As I stood there, an employee walked by and smiled warmly. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "thank you for everything you've built." I smiled back. I just did what needed to be done. When I stepped outside, the wind brushed my hair gently, and I could almost hear Robert's voice in it. Proud, loving, steady. They once called me a nobody, but now even the walls of this company speak my name, and that was the